We all know how important it is to fill up your car with gas before we head out on a long journey. The exact same thing applies to your running. Today we're going to talk about how you fuel for your running, before your run, during your run, and after your run. Right, I think we're just about done here. Let's head out. So in the same way that we've filled up our tank pre-trip, we do the same thing while we're running, right? We want to ensure that we have a full tank of fuel or energy to sustain us for the entire time that we are running. What does that mean? Because we're not putting in petrol or diesel. You need to ensure that you're having a really, really good breakfast before we go out. That breakfast needs to be done predominantly of carbohydrates. Some protein is helpful, but predominantly carbohydrates, because carbohydrates are the fuel that are going to keep us going during our run. If you are the sort of person that really struggles to have breakfast, I get that a lot. People saying I really struggle to eat. You can also have something like a half a glass of fruit juice, in particular something like a cranberry juice or a blueberry juice. The orange juice, the high fructose levels in there can disrupt the gut a little bit, so you want to ensure that you're not having that happening as well. Things that are great to eat as a food source before we go running, things like oats. I often have a slice of toast with some peanut butter and banana. That's my go-to. You also really want to ensure that we're hydrating well. You want to start your run in a good state of hydration, not in a poor state of hydration. So some water, and again, this is also something that you can use if you are an athlete that struggles to eat. You can sip on some energy juice before your run. One of the questions we get a lot of is about carbo loading. So before a race, should you be increasing your carbohydrate intake as you are preparing for your race? That aspect or that idea has actually been debunked. We don't want to necessarily increase our carbohydrate intake in our diet. The fact that you are tapering and that you've minimized your volume of training means that your body is going to perceive that energy as more anyways. So no, you don't need to increase your carbohydrate intake, but just make sure that you're tapering properly and minimizing that volume down, and you're getting the same effect as you would have with carbo loading. One of the problems that comes with carbo loading as well is the more carbohydrates you have, again, that can affect the gut, and we're not looking to do that. We want to make sure that everything is ready for race day. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend carbo loading. Make sure that you just getting a good healthy diet in and focusing on your hydration and generally good well-balanced diet.
So sometimes you just don't have time to fill your car up with petrol before you go off on a trip somewhere, but that means that you're going to have to stop somewhere and fill up. And running is exactly the same. So we all have really busy lives. Sometimes you just can't afford to wake up early enough to eat before you go out in the morning, or something crops up and so off you go training without having had anything. Well, the reality is that when that happens, just like in a car, if you do not stop and put petrol in the car, then you are going to be left standing on the side of the road. So if you're not going to fuel for your training, particularly on the very hard days and particularly on the long days, then you're going to have a problem in your training. You're not going to be able to perform the way you want to, and you risk being stuck on the side of the road. Luckily, there is a gas station. I'm going to stop and fill up. One of the things to remember about exercise, though, is the 90-minute rule. So it really doesn't matter whether you fueled before exercise or whether you're fueling in exercise. But we've only got enough carbohydrates stored in our muscles to last for between 90 minutes and 2 hours of exercise, depending on the intensity of the exercise. So if you are exercising for longer than an hour and a half, it's really important that you fuel in exercise. Well, now that we've got gas in the car, let's talk a little bit about what you need to do if you are fueling in exercise. So if you don't have time, or for whatever reason you haven't had fuel before, then it is important that we do during. But what are you going to take during exercise? So that'll depend a little bit on precisely what exercise you're doing. For your high intensity interval work, you want to mix yourself up a high carbohydrate drink or rely on something like carbohydrates. Quick access energy, so that can fuel that high intensity energy really well. If you're going on a longer type of training session, something lasting 90 minutes or more, then it's important that we fuel with a mix of fuels, much like you would if you were doing a marathon or longer event. So you're going to get some of your energy from stopping at gas stations or stopping at shops and buying yourself Powerades or Energiades or Gatorades or something along those lines, fruit juices. You're going to get some of your energy from maybe taking some gels along with you while you run, and then you can also incorporate things like solids, like taking bananas or small bits of sandwiches, or you can do things like Chelsea buns or energy bars, pretty much anything that you're going to be using when you stimulate to race. But the important thing is that if you're going to be doing high intensity exercise, if you're going to be doing long duration exercise, and in particular if you haven't had something before, then you've got to take these things at regular intervals. Every 30 to 40 minutes you want to be taking in a little bit, and my mantra always is small amounts often. Regardless of whether you are taking fuel for exercise or taking fuel in exercise, it's really important to fuel properly post exercise. And we've effectively got two windows. And the first window I still regard as in exercise. So that's the first 30 to 45 minutes after you have finished exercising. That falls during the in window. And why that is important is because during exercise, that is when our body is primed to take energy or sugar from the bloodstream and push it into the muscles and store it as muscle glycogen. So that process is very efficient in the first 30 to 40 minutes after exercise and becomes less and less efficient as we move away from exercise. When we move outside the window of exercise, it is still important that we carry on with that recovery process, but then the type of nutrients that we take in will change, and that's the period in which we want to make sure we're getting enough proteins and fats and more complex carbohydrates, because the sugars, simple sugars, won't be pushed into muscle. They'll actually be converted and potentially stored as fat. So we want to take in healthy fats, we want to take in proteins, and the significant thing about protein and protein recovery is it doesn't matter when in the day we take it in, as long as we are taking in enough. And you want to be getting around about 0.8 grams of protein per kg of body mass. That will be a nice guesstimate of how much protein you should be taking in.
So now that we know about fueling for training and fueling in training, we often just run out of fuel, get actually asked about running without eating breakfast or in a fasted state. Check out this video for everything you need to know about running in a fasted state.